Welcome to Decrypt, Asia's first blockchain and cryptocurrency podcast. I'm your host, Tushar. Each week, we take a deep dive into the Asian blockchain scene with investors, technologists, and industry insiders. Go to decrypt.asia to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Telegram to join in the discussions. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your thoughts on the cryptocurrency ecosystem in general and the ethos behind it. So during a discussion prior to this interview, you talked about your views on things like file sharing in the early days of the internet, incentivization mechanisms, subsistence economies, and monetary policies, and synchronicity. Let's pick up these topics and talk about it, if that's okay.
I maybe start in a different order. So I think like my own view of what technologies like Tangem, not necessarily just Tangem, but technologies like Tangem, technologies that really unlock, remove barriers of entry and unlock cryptocurrencies for massive amounts of users. So my hope for this is there would be two steps. And one is essentially making cryptocurrency ubiquitous so that everyone on Earth either already uses it or has very easy access to it. So essentially it's like paper money. So it's highly publicized that some countries like China or some populations are going cashless, but at the same time, even in those countries, every single person has easy access to paper money and can always get it, can always spend it. So my hope is technologies like Tangem and other types of technologies will eventually get crypto to this state. Let's not kid ourselves. Right now, cryptocurrencies are very, very far away from that state. We're still far below 1% population adoption, and to cross even 1% globally, we have to innovate the heck out of all the products around cryptocurrencies. So my hope is ubiquity will be the first big thing that will come, thanks to multiple technologies. But then what happens is even more interesting. I think what cryptocurrencies will allow, and we're seeing it right now, but on a small scale because of lack of adoption, is basically, what I call the end effect is infinite cash for everyone. And I'll explain. So for me, money has always been a means of communication rather than anything else. Money is essentially is a mechanism to say 2 hours of my work, to communicate that I think 2 hours of my work are worth 1 hour of your work, or 3 hours of my work are worth that and that product that you baked some bread in the morning, so I think it's worth an hour of my work. So all of that communication, essentially it used to be barter, and money allowed us to streamline all that barter and commoditize and automate and stream. Basically, money allowed all of these local barter processes to suddenly emerge into global liquid economy or economies. So looking at that, it definitely feels like money is just a protocol of communicating value between different economic agents, whoever they are. So we have 7 billion people in the world, we have hundreds of millions of companies in the world, and they all communicate between each other about what value they place on their goods and services. And money is serving that. The problem is historically, and even still in our time, money is very poorly defined and implemented. So basically, every country on earth has a limited cash pool of its own currency. There are usually severe limitations in every country for the use of foreign currencies. So usually every country prefers that local businesses and people only use its own currency, like inside its borders. And the problem is this cash pool of money is limited. It's of course growing in almost every case very fast, but at any point in time it's like severely limited, like very, very strictly. And the problem with that is there are professionals in the market, when we can call them the finance sector. The finance sector is allowing this whole monetary system to work, but at the same time, it has professionals whose only job is to grab and like centralize and amass as much of those of that currency as possible. And what happens, I think, is the cash pool is very quickly starved, it is essentially inevitable, because like you have a cash pool and you have professionals that make it their job to get as much out of this cash pool into their like centralized accounts as possible. So it's like if it's easy, it's an easy job for them. If it's hard, it means the cash pool is already starved. And what it means is the 99% of companies and people whose job is not the financial sector, but actually it's like producing something or doing some other services, then they find themselves in a situation where like everything seems to be good, but actually it's suddenly hard for them to like get money to participate in economies. And I think a lot of poverty in the world is what I call technical poverty, which means that and this is where we come to subsistence economies, like countries like Myanmar and like special cases like Venezuela, which recently ran out of paper cash and mostly other types of cash as well. So people there are not poor because they lack skills or they're lazy or they're sick. Not at all. They're hardworking, they're fit, they are actually like producing stuff. Like in Myanmar, until recently, it was almost 100% subsistence economy, which basically means people were eating what they grew on their land. Like everyone was growing rice or like other fruits and vegetables and stuff, and they were just eating it themselves directly without trading, because those territories and countries and situations, they just lacked cash. So you could, without cash, if there's no cash at all, like technically you don't have cash in your life because something went wrong with the government or the economy, you can only barter technically with your neighbors. Like you grew some rice, they have some meat, you can exchange part of it for like you can partially exchange and everyone benefits, but there's no economy. Like you can't just sell rice and go to a store and buy some crackers. So so that is what I call technical poverty. Just people, hardworking people doing a lot of useful work, but not being able to participate in economy and essentially having zero in their pocket or their bank account just because the cash pool is starved or dysfunctional. So I think what cryptocurrencies can do once they are ubiquitous, is allow the deficit of cash to be forever eradicated. And this is very fascinating for me personally, because when as a geek, I was growing up on Star Trek and other like sci-fi, and we always had that look into the future. And what we saw was a vision for Earth and like human society that basically ceased to have money as we know it right now. At least they ceased to have money as a concept of deficit. And like the Star Trek universe had different explanations around it, but until crypto came around, and until I started realizing this concept that we can really eradicate cash deficit, like that was like completely impossible for me to explain to myself. How can a society exist without one big limited cash pool? And now I sort of get it. So even with the ICOs and all of these new tokens and cryptocurrencies being issued at a very small scale, like less than 1% of population, we see value being created and value being supported by certain work and actions of those projects or of those, the users of those cryptocurrencies. And once crypto becomes ubiquitous, through one way or another, what's going to happen or what's going to be suddenly possible is for every human, every company, every project to essentially issue their own currency. And before you fret about it, because nobody wants to see a zillion of shitcoins, I fully believe different companies will develop more mechanisms and more paradigms to issue and to use new tokens in a much more responsible and versatile and safe ways. So that will definitely happen. It won't just be a zillion of ERC20 tokens. Definitely not. It will be some new concept around that. But every human, every project, every company, every group of people, everything can start releasing their own tokens, their own currencies, and the value of those are completely to be decided by the market. But the essence of it is, right now, I think everyone knows this adage that money makes money, and if you look for deeper effects in economy, there's more research that entrepreneurs are pushed by the current economic system to become owners. So if you're an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, then your whole environment pushes you to convert at a certain point from entrepreneur to some role in a big company to a shareholder. And once you're a shareholder, and pushed out of the day-to-day operations, you do nothing, you just grow your wealth and benefit from it. And it's a very well-known effect that right now in the current economy, if you start something, then it means you own it, and then it means ownership is enough for you, and it makes more money than actually starting anything new. And that's a very poor effect. But that is because in limited cash pools, the more you hold of money or of shares, the more deficit there is, and the more the value of what you hold is growing. But with cryptocurrencies, I think it's the opposite. I think even, if you look at the success of Bitcoin Cash, which is a very controversial and questionable project, a lot of people at a certain point in time, they were so tired of Bitcoin being so, expensive and inaccessible and growing too fast, that when an alternative sprung up out of nowhere and it was at first much cheaper, they just grabbed at that opportunity. Which means that as soon as if suddenly tomorrow we see that Bitcoin is mostly controlled by a bunch of the 0.1% of individuals in the world, and everyone else just has crumbles, then it's not a problem, because we can start 100 other cryptocurrencies or tokens, and we can just trade them between us, the working population, whereas the hoarders and the owners, which do nothing but look at their bank accounts or their wallets, they will they will just look at their accounts, and the currencies they hold, they can go down. Is that too long of a rant?
No, I think that is a possibility. I mean, although I'm not sure, and maybe I'm not thinking about this the right way, but are we just creating money out of thin air when you say that
right? So it's fantastical until you think about what internet did. So I always explain it this way: if you go back to 1980, or 1985. You like, if you want to get some information about some person on the other end of the world, like let's say we're now, like, I'm in Hong Kong, you're in Singapore, we want to learn something about a company or a person in the United States. If we are in 1985, what you have to do is you have to hire a research agency or a private investigator, and you pay them a lot of money, like a few $1,000s, and you wait for a month, and then you get some report. And if you tell all of those professionals that in a couple of decades you would be able to do all of that work for free in seconds out of the comfort of your office, just by using Google or like LinkedIn or some other service, they would tell you you're crazy, because information costs money. Information is like everything, and it's costly to collect and to filter through and all of that. But right now, there are billions of people in the world having free access to Google and Facebook and all of those services, and we have infinite access to virtually infinite information. And like Wikipedia and all of that is like knowledge became untapped and infinite and free for everyone. And I think if we think about money as a flow of information and like a means of communication between people, what internet did to information, cryptocurrencies are doing to money. So I really think if you imagine again, like what exactly, because we all grew, internet took decades to develop, and we sort of grew up with it. So it happened so slowly that we failed to miss the humongous effect it had on human economy and information. And I think cryptocurrencies are gonna reach same effects for like our monetary systems, but much faster. So it's much more exciting to look at them developing.
And so how do you think the world looks like in a few years' time, when things actually start maturing a little bit? Like, do you have any predictions? Like, do you sit down and think about like how the world would look like, say 5-10 years from now?
I mean, yeah, I have the optimistic view, and at the same time, I have a very, very sober realization that, Elon Musk brought it up recently that by default, progress doesn't happen. Actually, what happens by default, unless there are specific people driving progress with all of their, dedicating all of their lives to human progress, by default, what happens is that we went to the moon, and we had technical capacity to send many more missions to the moon, and now we can't. No, we really can't. It's like out of our reach right now. So by default, progress doesn't happen. And with blockchain technologies, I really understand that, first of all, by default, nothing much will happen unless we really start fixing user experience and merchant experience and all of that. And that's like the sad version. Like, okay, it could become a fad. But then an even scarier version is that blockchain technology might get leveraged by suppressive governments and some bad actors for whatever agenda they have. And I see that as a very, very real possibility. And I think, again, we have to, as engineers and innovators, we have to carefully design our products and our solutions to foster a good behavior, not without any restrictions, just to be like flexible enough for normal human activities to be, unrestricted and possible. And then the optimistic view is that in maybe what I hope to see in 5 to 10 years, although technically this is doable right this year. Right this year, we can have infinite cash for everyone around the world. But understand the organizational and political challenges around that. So I sort of give it like 5 to 10 years only for like organizations and politics to get around it. But technically, we're ready even as we speak. And I see the world without, without cash poverty. I see the world where people have immediate possibility to do whatever they love to do, whatever they are aspiring to do, and to be guided by the market to make progress, to improve their skills, to improve what they're doing. So I see all barriers that are created by the current monetary systems around the world. Even venture capital, which is like one of the biggest achievements of civilization. Like if you talk to founders in the Silicon Valley and other places around the world, and as a disclaimer, I think we both come from the world of venture capital, more or less. But if you talk to the founders, especially when they look at what's happening in the field of cryptocurrencies, they suddenly come to this realization that venture capital is extremely dysfunctional. It puts so many barriers that are just not very benign or not very useful, that it's mind-boggling how much progress is being stifled out of life at very early stages, just because there's not enough like liquidity of attention and there's not enough merit in decisions being made. So I think all of that is like very, very ripe for disruption or very fast evolution. As we know, a lot of funds and venture funds are transitioning to start crypto branches or to embrace crypto very aggressively and very fast. Especially this year, I think this year we saw a very interesting pivot where last year most of the ICO money came from retail investors. This year, maybe 80-90% of it is coming from institutional investors and just generally very large investors. So that is happening, and I think very fast we're gonna have this chance to find ourselves in a world where money is not a barrier anymore for anything. If you have no money, you can just tell the world that, okay, this is my token or whatever, and if you believe in me and look at what I do, and if you believe in me, then you can value that, and I can go to Starbucks tomorrow and have my coffee because you value my stuff, and it immediately gives me value. And if you don't, there will be mechanisms for the market to suggest to myself what I can do, best or better to succeed in the market. Right. So it will remove the zero-sum game that limited cash pools are creating for all of us around the world.
Right. So let's talk about one of the other concepts that you talked about, which was synchronicity. So could you elaborate on what that means and how it's prevalent in the world today, and how it touches crypto or how it influences crypto?
Right. So I just think that, okay, it can sound a little bit metaphysical or like out there.
Absolutely. Let's do that. Let's. We like stuff which is out there.
Okay. You have to all this mystery around who Satoshi is and basically why now and all of that, because technically we look at crypto and we understand that more or less like the exact current implementation of Bitcoin and crypto, it could well have happened a decade ago. Like there's nothing technically really preventing it from happening a decade ago. Yes, maybe right now it's like slightly easier for current computers to do it, but really a decade ago it could like completely happen, but it didn't. So why now, and who are like the inventors of it, and like did they even understand what they were doing? I think like nobody like was really anticipating the whole effect. And what I tell myself sometimes is, okay, somehow humanity is ready for this next step. Somehow humanity needed to be limited in its like, okay, somehow humanity needed this limitation of money, this concept of money that was putting a limitation on our creativity and on our pursuits, but somehow we grew out of that phase, and maybe we're as a civilization, as the world, we're suddenly ready for the next step, where our pursuits are not defined by strictly like monetary facts, but rather by like inspiration and all this flow of information, which has been enabled by the internet itself. And when I think about this this way, I start recognizing also that basically, like it's not just Bitcoin, because like you can't just explain it so easily that Bitcoin appeared and then it inspired Vitalik to make Ethereum, and then inspired a bunch of other people to. So you can't just explain all of this explosion of different technologies around blockchain and crypto. You cannot just explain it as a chain reaction of inspiration, or at least I find it very difficult to explain that way. But what I see is like completely different cultures around the world reaching a level where they're ready for something like radically new in terms of in terms of economy, in terms of how they approach work at all. And at the same time, we see all this conversation about humanity running out of meaningful work and necessary work, and then we have to invent universal basic income in some ways. And it's hardly, it's very difficult to believe that it's just a coincidence that the peak of discussion around UBI and humanity running out of work coincided with this invention of blockchain and crypto, which could well be the best mechanism for us to solve like UBI and all the other problems. So I think last time we spoke, I gave some other examples of synchronicity, but I really believe that crypto and blockchain, as we see it, are just part of something much, much bigger. And personally, even working on Tangem, personally, I gave up thinking of all the effects crypto is going to have on humanity, because all of our patterns of thinking are still based in history, in like centuries of history. And even right now, when people are thinking about crypto, most of the vocabulary we're using for it is the vocabulary used for fiat money and for stock markets, but it really doesn't make any sense, because like we already understand rationally that crypto does not follow those laws, and it's a completely different entity with its own effects and its own possibilities and its own like mechanics for issuing new value and creating new value. Like everyone with the salt rationally understands it, but we're still using the current vocabularies just because we didn't develop a new language for it. And this is the most fascinating situation of all. Like we're already stumbling into something new without having words to explain it, or without having a vocabulary to even think about it. We're just trying to use our old vocabulary to like approach the meaning of this new thing. And I think there's much hope for even the younger generation, because they're gonna take a look at crypto and they're gonna use it in ways that we thought are like improper or irresponsible or impossible. There's a very good explanation for startups like Google happening, and the explanation is the founders were so young and so inexperienced, they didn't know that it was impossible to do a startup like that, and because they didn't know it was impossible, they just did it. And I think it's as beautiful as it is true. And again, like I think society is approaching like a level where it's ready for a whole different approach to work and economy and economic communication between everyone. And all of these technologies and conversations are just sort of emergent mechanisms for it to happen. And nobody really fully understands what's really happening. I'm also very fascinated that cryptocurrencies highlighted that even the current monetary mechanics around fiat money, almost nobody understands it. So there are regulators. There's like in America, there's SEC. There are stock exchanges. There are big banks. There are different like types of regulators and agents in the financial sector. And if you talk to people from different agencies, they can't even agree on basic theories behind money. And that is absolutely fascinating, because like so much is driven by money right now, but nobody really understands like the fundamentals and how money is created and what it means, like the effects of those like creations. It's just the financial sector, like every company in it, like hedge funds and funds and venture capital, is like good at what they do because they sort of empirically arrived at their own industry and are just doing it. And cryptocurrencies, by generating so much attention and by when you introduce a full alternative to an existing system, you provoke a very sober look at what that previous system used to be. And it's like the feeling is it's being exposed for its inconsistency and lack of common sense, and basically lack of any ability to compete against something more coherent and more useful and more functional and more fair and more transparent and all of that, which is like what cryptocurrency is bringing. So yeah, I think different cultures around the world simultaneously arriving at this new moment in our evolution, and cryptocurrency blockchain is just happening synchronously around the world at the same time in similar ways to different peoples, different countries. It's just it's just a mechanism, and we're still yet to understand what will happen in the next 5 years. For me, I think I anticipate the most interesting period in many centuries, because we're going to develop this new language to talk about value and how we place value on our work and on our interactions as people. And
yeah, I definitely agree. And so I meet a lot of folks from the crypto ecosystem on a daily basis as part of my day job and also through the podcast. And this is something I've realized as well. So I think there's a certain way that people in crypto think, which cuts across cultures, languages, nationalities, and it's something that kind of brings people together. Like people in crypto, it's just so much easier to get along with them because you have this shared purpose in terms of what you're trying to do and the beliefs that you have about multiple different topics. Right, so it's just a fascinating thing that I think that you kind of touched upon as well. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience that we may not have covered during the interview?
Just to react to your last phrase, I think it's very beautiful that through their speculative aspects, cryptocurrencies, for the first time I see this effect, cryptocurrencies are leveraging people through greed, through this herd instinct of like, okay, let's make some money. They're leveraging people through greed to come and actually do something productive and potentially productive and useful. And this is unique because usually leveraging bad habits only leads to like bad effects. But here I see people getting into these economies, and I see a lot of opportunists. Even like I talk to people around the world. Some of them just point blank tell me, okay, I'm an opportunist. I came into this industry because I saw the opportunity and I couldn't miss it. But once they're inside, a lot of them are turning from opportunists to creative professionals working on projects. And even if it is like a complete vaporware project, they still learn how to do proper marketing. And by the time they're through with their ICO or whatnot, they're already useful professionals ready to, they suddenly trick themselves into doing useful, reasonable projects. And this is fascinating. I don't think anything like that happened. If you look at all the previous like tulip craze or all of those historic examples of mass hysteria where people are chasing money, in every one of those instances, there were no positive effects. Maybe like some marginal ones, but at the core of all those hysterias, like there were no positive effects. But if you look at crypto, of course there are some like fringe negative effects, like people leading luxurious lifestyles when they can't really afford it or something like that. But most people are working their asses off, motivated at first by greed, but then by the success of their projects, and then by building real good products that bring value to their customers. So I really think, we're right now we're looking at something at this effect that turns the whole concept of value and amassing value and amassing money on its head, and incentivizes everyone in the world to come out and work hard and to be creative and bold and open to the within their communities and to the world. And I'm trying not to, I'm very sincere and objective when I say all of this. I really think that the effect is massive. We're only seeing it on a small scale because the adoption is so small right now. But once we push crypto to be more ubiquitous across the world, I think it's going to be an awakening. And again, we're reading all of these effects that people are stuck in meaningless jobs around the world, and all of this is going to be disrupted, and all of these people around the world, like billions of people, are suddenly going to be both encouraged and enabled to be the most creative and productive versions of themselves. And this keeps me excited every day.
Awesome. I think that's a great note to end the interview.
Great.
Yeah. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time out to come speak with us. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun. Yes.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Like us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Telegram, and subscribe to our newsletter on decrypt.asia. This is your host, Tushar. Thank you for listening.